Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the smoky, spiced, and ever so slightly chaotic world of ancient Persian palace cuisine. That's right, you are the royal chef. No pressure, you only have to cook for the most powerful family in the empire, survive geese-related trauma, and make sure no one dies from under-seasoned lentils. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if. Before you drift off, hit subscribe before the kitchen goat comes asking why you're not supporting the channel. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this royal feast travels across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins with a bell. Not the gentle kind, not a string of chimes softly announcing dawn. No, this one clangs like a pan falling on a goat's head, and frankly, that might have happened. You don't know yet. You jolt awake on your mat in the back corner of the kitchen storeroom, a space you proudly refer to as the pantry suite. It smells of cardamom old onions and the vague memory of burnt sugar. You roll over and squint at the half-light pouring in from the slit in the mud brick wall. The sun's still hiding, but the palace is already alive. Boots clatter, pots clang. A rooster screams with what feels like too much enthusiasm. You sit up. Your knees creak. Your back sighs. Your apron is already half on because you fell asleep in it. Again, outside the kitchen, servants scurry. You hear someone shouting about the missing barley pot, and someone else sobbing softly about the cursed yogurt. You pull your sandals on, grab your spatula, a flattened bronze paddle polished with pride, and emerge into the chaos. The main kitchen is lit by oil lamps and panic. You dodge a boy carrying eggs. You step over a basket of turnips. You nod politely to the head of ceremonial teas, who looks like she hasn't blinked since yesterday. Your first stop, the storeroom. It's small, dark, smoky, and smells like at least 4 spices that are no longer legal in half the empire. You check your scroll list. It's short. Too short. You mutter, "Where's the coriander?" The apprentice, sleepy barefoot and chewing a fig, points to a shelf that hasn't existed since last month's structural collapse. You sigh. Check the jars. There's mint. Good. Sumac. Great. Pickled garlic that's been whispering threats since last spring. Still here. Probably possessed. You leave it alone. You light a lamp, and nearly faint, because there, on the bottom shelf behind the vinegar jug and the emergency lentil stash, is a bag of actual cinnamon. Not bark, not ground-up sticks from a shrub pretending to be cinnamon. Real, actual cinnamon. You lift it gently, reverently. Historians still argue whether Persian royal kitchens had steady access to true imported spices, or if chefs relied on clever substitutions and lies. You now understand both perspectives deeply. You hold the cinnamon up like a sacred relic, then immediately pocket it. No one needs to know. You move into prep mode. Breakfast for the royal family isn't just a tray of fruit and a loaf of bread. It's an orchestra. There's yogurt with honey and cucumber, flat bread, baked in a clay oven that currently makes a noise like a trapped bird. Fried eggs with dates and green garlic paste, and rosewater syrup, because apparently water that smells like nothing is offensive. You delegate. The apprentice grumbles, but peels onions. You roast lentils in sesame oil until they pop like applause. You chop herbs with the speed of someone who has been yelled at about parsley too many times. Then disaster. You smell it before you see it. Burnt dates. You run to the oven. Too late. The tray has charred. The sugar has gone from golden to tar pit black. You pull it out and watch the smoke drift upward like a spirit leaving its body. You toss it into the ash pile and start again. Faster. Angrier. The bell rings again. This time, softer, but more urgent. It's the signal. The family is awake. You plate everything with trembling hands. Add garnishes. Wipe the edges like you're about to propose to a plate of yogurt. Servants, file in, lift the trays, and sweep away in silence. You exhale. You survived breakfast. Barely. The apprentice asks, "Do we get to eat?" You hand him a burnt date. He chews it and says, "Crunchy." You sit. Pour yourself tea, and knew with aching certainty that this was the easiest part of your day. The moment breakfast leaves the kitchen, you drop into triage mode. That's when the real panic begins. Not the loud kind, but the quiet, simmering dread of knowing the next fire isn't a question of if, but where. You step back into the storeroom. The smoke from the burnt date tray is still drifting upward like the ghost of yesterday's lunch. You wave it away with your apron. Time for inventory. You pull out your clay list, the one etched by hand, updated daily, and featuring an artistic doodle of a melon for morale. It's stained, smudged, and smells faintly of bay leaves. Your eyes scan the list. Grapes dwindling. Lamb 4 legs too short. Pomegranates squishy. Garum. Why do we still have this fennel? No idea who keeps stealing it, but they're bold and persistent. You light your second lamp and begin checking shelves. There's a sack of flour with a suspicious hole that may or may not contain a weasel. You decide not to investigate. There's courage, and then there's career suicide. The spice rack is worse. Your cumin's been over-dried. Your sumac has clumped into a decorative rock. And your precious saffron, reduced to 5 threads and a whisper of regret. You make a note. Trade something useless for saffron, possibly the apprentice. You spot a jar labeled unknown fragrant and pop the lid. Immediately regret it. Whatever it was, it isn't anymore. You seal it quickly. Apologize to the gods of fermentation and tuck it behind a vinegar barrel you hope you'll never need. Historians still argue whether Persian royal kitchens maintained proper labeling practices or simply relied on smell and generational trauma. You now believe both approaches were employed, usually at the same time. Suddenly, from outside, shouting. Then silence. Then the Queen's nutritionist appears in the doorway like a fever dream in ivory robes. He glides in like he's floating eyes, scanning the room with the judgment of someone who's never cooked a meal in his life but knows exactly how you should do it. Chef, he says, voice like dry papyrus. We need to revise the royal digestive plan. You blink. He produces a scroll the length of your forearm. No more honeyed figs, he says. Too warming. And reduce lentils by half. The Crown Prince has reported excessive wind. You stare. He continues. Also introduce more cooling herbs and no vinegar on Tuesdays. It disturbs the internal moon. You want to argue. You want to ask if he's ever met vinegar on a Wednesday. But instead, you nod. He leaves. You immediately grab a fig, dip it in honey, and eat it out of spite. The apprentice walks in. Was that the nutritionist? You grunt. He holds up 2 onions. These were fighting in the corner. Should I separate them? You take them both. No. I need their energy. You return to the prep area and begin slicing for mid-morning snack trays, a tradition brought in by a foreign noble who once fainted from hunger between breakfast and lunch. Now everyone pretends it's normal. Today's snack: flatbread, curls, melon, slices, and tiny jars of herbed yogurt that require more effort than a marriage proposal. You plate it with elegance. Serve it with detachment. As the trays leave, you lean on the wall. Your back aches. Your fingers are stained. Your soul smells faintly of cardamom. You sip water. Think about the spice market. Think about running away and opening a date stand somewhere with less poultry. Then the door slams open. A young courier stumbles in, covered in flour and terror. He pants. They've changed the lunch menu. You stare. Of course they have. Of course they changed the lunch menu. That's what nobles do. It's their favorite seasoning chaos. The courier wheezes as he unrolls a scroll, the ink still smudged from haste. You grab it with hands that have chopped too many onions and too many hopes. You read. Then you read again. Then you laugh quietly, like someone just asked you to ice skate on a clay roof. Saffron trout. That's the new royal craving. For lunch. In 20 minutes. You fold the scroll slowly, ceremoniously, like you're tucking away a death sentence. The apprentice peeks over your shoulder. "We don't have trout," he whispers. "No," you reply. "And we don't have saffron," he adds, with the emotional tone of a man reporting a missing friend. "No." He thinks for a second. "So, what's the plan?" You stare into the middle distance, where the flames from the clay oven dance like gossiping ghosts. Then you say the words that no chef should ever say out loud. We improvise. You march into the storeroom, past the pickled mystery jars and the sassily rotten turnip, and grab river fish from the cold box. They're not trout. They're not even trying to be trout. But they'll do if you squint, lie, and plate them with enough herbs to confuse the court astrologer. Next, you tackle the saffron issue. You open your private stash. 5 lonely threads lie at the bottom, like abandoned wishes. You close the jar. Then, in an act of sheer culinary audacity, you pull out turmeric rosewater and the tiniest pinch of smoked salt, and begin brewing what you affectionately call desperate golden sauce. Historians still argue whether Persian chefs truly followed royal recipes or simply created edible illusions wrapped in confidence. You are now conducting primary research on this theory. You coat the fish, sear it lightly in sesame oil, garnish it with rose petals and sliced green almonds. It smells expensive, and that's what matters. The apprentice brings the platter. Will they know? You shrug. Probably not. And if they do blame the nutritionist, lunch trays are carried off. You collapse onto the nearest sack of barley, but rest is never loyal. Moments later, the soup boy runs in, looking like he's aged a decade. The lentil stew was cold, he gasps. You blink. It was 5 degrees too cold, he adds. The room goes still. 5 degrees. That's the culinary equivalent of treason in a palace where tea is measured by temperature, and astrologers consult the stars before seasoning. You rise, walk to the soup cauldron, dip your ladle, taste. It's fine, but not hot. You narrow your eyes at the apprentice. He shrinks into the herb rack like a guilty shadow. You turn to the kitchen team. No more room temperature rebellion, you declare. Heat everything until it sweats for its sins. You reheat the stew, slowly, thoroughly, with vengeance and cumin. Then, as a precaution, you prepare a second pot, spicier, hotter, and garnished with chopped basil and something pickled you found behind the olive jar that smelled right. The apprentice hovers. Will they like it? You reply, it's hot, it's bold, and it might cause spontaneous enlightenment. So yes, the new batch is sent out. You wait. The tray returns. Empty. Clean. No notes. Just silence. Victory. You high-five the apprentice. He misses. You high-five yourself. Then the flower girl rushes in breathless. Did you forget the princess's birthday feast? You freeze. The princess? Her birthday. Today. Right now. With 30 guests. All expecting dessert. You turn slowly and say, get me a melon, a sharp knife, and 10 minutes. The melon is exactly what you feared, slightly overripe and shaped like a regret. You set it on the carving table like a prisoner awaiting trial. The flower girl hovers. So? The princess likes swans. You nod slowly, like someone accepting the impossible with grace and a thinly veiled scream. A melon swan, carved, in 10 minutes, with guests already seated and probably halfway through their honeyed pistachios. You grab your blade, curved, polished, and possibly older than half the court staff, and begin slicing. Wings first, thin, fanned, delicate. Then the neck, arched elegant, suspiciously similar to a question mark, and the beak. You improvise with a sliver of carrot. Not period accurate, but the nobles won't know. The apprentice watches with the awe of a man witnessing divine intervention through fruit. Should I light a candle? He asks. No, you mutter. Light a path to the banquet hall. This bird flies in 30 seconds. You finish the swan just as a servant rushes in with a tray of mint sherbet and terror. You place the swan in the center. tuck in rose petals around the base, and dust the whole affair with crushed pistachio, like edible snow. The tray vanishes. You exhale like a mountain collapsing in relief. Moments later, distant applause, then a much closer sound, a snort. You turn. The monk is back, the one from the temple, holding his infamous sacred buns. He says nothing, just stares at your carving, then at your oven, then politely, "Do you mind if I use your heat for divinity?" You blink. Say nothing. He takes this as permission and slides a tray of spiritual pastries into your carefully calibrated roasting oven. You clench your jaw. The buns smell infuriatingly amazing. A blend of cinnamon, dried fig, and what might be inner peace. The monk bows. They must not burn. It would be a sign. You nod tightly. Historians still argue whether Persian palace kitchens were purely secular or quietly shared by religious orders. At this point, you just want the buns and the monk to coexist somewhere else. You check the spice rack. Half empty. You refill it. Then the goat enters. No one knows where it came from, or why it's here. It walks in, sniffs the cumin, knocks over a basket of radishes. You chase it out with a ladle and a threat. The monk doesn't blink. Your apprentice claps. The goat leaves slowly, like it's doing you a favor. You turn back to the oven. The buns are golden. Perfect. The monk returns, thanks you, and vanishes with his tray like a cinnamon-scented ghost. You consider stealing one. But you have other problems. The apprentice stands by the storage door, pale. He whispers, "There's a meat delivery." You frown. It's the wrong day for deliveries. He nods, and the crate is leaking. You stare at the hallway like it personally betrayed you. Then you follow the smell. The crate sits near the back entrance, sweating in the sun. The wood is warped. The wax seal is cracked. And from within comes a faint sloshing that should not be happening with meat. You prod the lid with a spoon. The apprentice winces. You lift it slowly. Inside, unlabeled mystery. You poke it again. Soft, damp, possibly animal, possibly basilisk. You don't ask. You summon the royal food taster. He arrives, peeks inside, turns green. "Not goat," he says. You nod. "Not lamb," he adds. You nod again. Then, with great dignity, he says, "We do not speak of this," and leaves. You reseal the crate and place it next to the outgoing compost wagon. whispering a prayer for whichever merchant thought this was fit for a king. Back in the kitchen, you find a note, scrawled in haste. King wants dinner early, with fresh bread. You drop your head onto the prep table. The apprentice pats your shoulder, then immediately asks, "So, we bake now." You stand up, pull flour from the shelf, and whisper to yourself, "Let's knead destiny." The flour lands in the bowl with a soft whoomph, a gentle little cloud that promises everything and delivers wrist pain. You mix, you knead, you sweat. The apprentice attempts to help, but mostly just gets flour on his elbows and somehow in his hair. The dough, to its credit, behaves rising quickly in the warm air, puffing up like it's trying to escape this kitchen nightmare. You shape the loaves. Round ones for dipping, flat ones for stacking, braided ones for visual flair that absolutely no one will notice. You open the oven and pray to every fire, God, culinary deity, and starch spirit from here to the Indus River. Slide the bread in, close the door, and wait. The palace bell rings twice. The king is ready. Early. Because of course he is. You peek into the oven. The bread isn't done. Not quite. You tap one loaf, it responds like a deflated pillow. Apprentice, you say, yes? Distract the king. His eyes widen. With what? You hand him a tray of olives, a folded napkin, and your most serious stare. He leaves. You assume this is both his bravest and worst decision of the week. You stoke the fire, add more embers. The oven roars. The bread rises. A miracle. You remove the loaves one by one, steam curling up like a magician's flourish. Each is golden, cracked, perfect. You brush the tops with herb oil, place them carefully into the platter with sliced lamb mint rice and a side of something pickled that's never been officially identified, but pairs surprisingly well with royalty. You deliver the tray yourself. It is received with polite nods and the kind of royal disinterest that says, "This had better taste like diplomacy." You retreat, triumphant, back to the kitchen, where, of course, the herb rack is on fire. Again. You stare. The apprentice stands nearby, holding a half-burned sprig of dill and a guilty conscience. "I was trying to dry it faster," he says. You grab the fire scoop and start beating out flames with a damp cloth and your last ounce of patience. Historians still argue whether fire was friend or foe in ancient kitchens. You argue it's both and usually at the same time. Once the smoke clears, and the rack is more charcoal than storage, you collapse onto a bench. Then, from across the courtyard, a voice calls, "The king loved the bread." You blink. Look up. The palace herald stands proudly chest-puffed. You blink again. The braiding, he adds, reminded him of his youth. You smile. A real one. The apprentice claps accidentally, flinging flour into his own eyes. You don't even mind. But your joy lasts exactly 6 minutes, because the Queen's lady-in-waiting arrives, holding a scroll. You read it. Of course, a midnight tea for visiting envoys, with snacks and atmosphere, and fruit cut into philosophically appropriate shapes. You mutter something under your breath that may technically qualify as a curse. You stand, stretch, and begin sorting figs from pomegranates. Again, quirky fact. Persian court believed that food shapes carried meaning. Circles for unity, triangles for fate, melon wedges for the unknowable sweet of life. Or possibly just because they stacked well on trays. You prep in silence. Carve tiny roses from beet slices. Shape stars from cucumbers. The apprentice attempts a philosophical pair and ends up inventing a new emotion. You call it confused disappointment. Midnight approaches. The trays are ready. Steam curls gently from the spiced tea urn. The melon slices glisten under lamp glow. You wipe your hands. You breathe. And then the thunder. A sudden crash, followed by rain. Hard, fast, uninvited. You rush to cover the trays. The apprentice slips in the mud and takes out a small pyramid of sugared almonds. You both stare, then rebuild. Because that's what chefs do. You improvise. You recover. You serve in the rain, with your head held high and a tray of quietly revolutionary figs. And somehow, they smile. The envoys, the nobles, even the queen. Your apprentice whispers, "I think that melon wedge changed someone." You whisper back, "That's the power of snacks." The rain doesn't stop, not after the tea. Not after the envoys leave. Not even after you bribe the sky with 2 perfectly good trays of almond pastries left unattended in the courtyard. So now, the palace kitchen is damp. The floors slippery. The ceiling dripping in 2 spots and threatening in a third. The apprentice, wearing lettuce, leaves on his feet to improve traction. You step carefully, already regretting every architectural decision made by your ancestors. Then the steward arrives, wearing an expression that screams, "I've brought a problem." and I want you to love it. He clears his throat. The king's mother would like something light before her nap. You blink. She's napping during a thunderstorm. He nods. It soothes her bones. You stare into the middle distance, then ask, "What does she want?" He shrugs. Something soft, with cardamom and memory. You sigh. You know exactly what that means. Rice pudding. Not the simple, comforting kind. No, she wants the one from that one festival, with the tiny pistachio curls and the honey that took 3 months to infuse. You send the apprentice for milk. He returns wet and triumphant. You start the rice. Slow, low heat, stirring in figure eights like a monk reciting a dessert prayer. Historians still argue whether royal comfort food was culinary art or subtle political theater. You've stirred enough nostalgia-laced puddings to know it's both. As it thickens, the kitchen fills with steam and story. You add the cardamom, then the honey, then the rose water. Then, because memory demands it, a single pinch of cinnamon. You know she'll smell it before the bowl touches the tray. The pudding goes out, and for a moment, the kitchen is quiet. Until, chef, you spin. It's the palace tailor. You blink. Why are you in my kitchen? He holds up a tray. They are requesting something for tonight's gathering. A dessert shaped like a turban. You don't answer. You just close your eyes and mentally walk into the desert. But he waits, so you nod, slowly, like someone planning a quiet rebellion via pastry. You grab phyllo dough, apricot, paste, crushed pistachios, and determination. You roll layer coil. By the time it's baked, it does look vaguely turban-like if the turban wearer had flaky layers and a golden hue. You send it off with a handwritten note, best served with humility and strong tea. Then it happens. The tray comes back, empty, with a gold coin tucked beneath the cloth. The apprentice gasps. Is this a tip? You nod, stunned. Mark the date, he whispers. History was made. You write it down on the wall beside the broken herb rack. Turban pastry. First coin received. But celebration doesn't last, because just as you sit, the fishmonger arrives, dripping, shivering, holding a net with a single enormous eel. You stare. He says, "The royal astrologer requested it." You raise one eyebrow. He says, "It's part of an omen ritual." You raise the other. Something about Saturn and digestion. You sigh. Take the eel. Name it regret. You place it in the stone basin and stare at it. It stares back. There's a moment of mutual understanding and loathing. "Cook it," the apprentice asks. "No," you mutter. We consult. You call the palace astrologer. He arrives smelling like sandalwood, and certainty says, "It must be braised with celery and crushed fig leaf." You stare, then ask, "Have you ever eaten anything that wasn't celestial?" He smiles. "Only on Thursdays." You prepare the eel. Braised, fig leaf, aromatic herbs, a sauce made from pomegranate and possibly revenge. The astrologer samples it, nods slowly. This pleases the planets. You resist the urge to throw a spoon. By the time the tray leaves, you are exhausted. Your feet hurt. Your sleeves are soaked, and the goat is back. Eating what's left of the lettuce leaves the apprentice was using as shoes. You just sigh, because at this point, you don't cook. You conjure. You don't serve food. You maintain planetary balance. Somewhere in the distance, thunder mutters like a disgruntled aunt. The rain slows to a drizzle, but the kitchen, it does not. You lean against a shelf, dripping slightly. Your fingers dusted in flour, fig paste, and whatever that eel left behind emotionally. The apprentice tiptoes in. He whispers, "The king's cousin just arrived." You nod. He adds, "With guests, uninvited." You blink. And he's the apprentice. Gulps. He's promised them a special dinner experience. You don't even flinch. Because, of course he has. You've learned that royal cousins are like stray cats. They appear without warning, demand feeding, and pretend they own the house. You grab your prep scroll and begin plotting. No time for fancy. You reach for what's left of your chickpeas garlic and a bundle of leeks that somehow survived 3 other meals and an attempted theft by the goat. You begin assembling a feast on instinct, a meal made of improvisation and sheer willpower. First, herbed chickpea. Fritters, fried in a pan that's seen more drama than the Queen's astrologer. Then, a lentil stew, thick and smoky, with a dash of tamarind, and the echo of better ingredients you don't have. And for the main dish, stuffed onions filled with spiced rice, mint, and just enough chopped dried apricot to make it seem intentional. You plate them. You sprinkle sumac. You light a small flame beneath the tray for drama. The apprentice watches eyes wide. "Should we make dessert?" he asks. You sigh, then nod. Because what else can you do? You crush almonds. You melt sugar. You whip egg whites with the focus of a monk polishing temple bell tails. And just like that, you birth almond clouds, tiny puffs of sweetness that smell like forgiveness and taste like survival. You send the feast off with a bow and a warning glare to the messenger. Do not let anyone rearrange the plating. Then you wait. You drink water. You stretch. And you try to sit for 30 uninterrupted seconds, which is exactly when the royal falconer enters. Because, of course, he's holding a tray. On the tray, a feather. Next to the feather, a note. You unfold it. It reads, "The falcons are molting." The king desires a symbolic dish to mark the season. You stare at the feather. You stare at the falconer. You stare into the void. Then you whisper, "Find me eggplants." The apprentice bolts into action. You slice them into strips. You roast them until they curl like feathers. You dust them with coriander and brush them with sesame oil. You stack them into a little spiral tuck in a sprig of mint and name it Molting Glory. The falconer sniffs, nods, vanishes. You collapse against the counter, only to hear a soft knock, a gentle knock, dangerous. You open the door. It's the royal calligrapher. He smiles. "I just wanted to say your lunch menu today was a poem." You blink. You ate. He nods. Twice. Then he hands you something. It's a scroll. On it, written in the finest ink, your name surrounded by metaphors about fire and cinnamon and the courage of lentils. You stare at it. Then you laugh, because somewhere between the geese, the eel, and the falcon, tribute someone noticed. You hang the scroll above the spice rack, just above where the dill used to live before it combusted. Historians still argue whether palace chefs were ever honored formally or remained anonymous artisans in service of the state. Today, you got poetic proof that you exist. You turn to your apprentice. "Let's prep for tomorrow," you say. He groans. You smile. Because the kitchen's still warm, the fire still burns. And you're still standing. Barely, but gloriously. By now, the moon has climbed halfway up the sky, glowing like a ladle dipped in silver. The palace hums with the low, steady rhythm of digestion, drunken lute melodies, and diplomatic small talk drifting through mosaic hallways. You are chopping garlic. Again. The apprentice yawns. You glare. He straightens. Because the job isn't over. It's never over. Not when you're the only line of defense between the royal digestive systems and a national embarrassment. You're prepping for the late supper snack, not a meal, a concept. Something light, but warm. Something spiced, but not heavy. Something sweet, but with a sense of caution. You rummage through the spice jars, some full, some crusted, shut, and one that's making a low rattling noise you choose to ignore. You settle on stewed quince with clove flatbread, with herbed yogurt, and a small dish of dates soaked in wine and audacity. You prep quickly, humming to yourself a half-forgotten melody from when you cooked for a caravan master who paid in stories and, occasionally, gold teeth. The trays are ready, just as a servant rushes in with the evening digestive. Protocol. Scroll an unnecessarily long document detailing exactly what not to serve the royal uncles based on their astrological mood chart. You sigh, cross off the yogurt. You serve a bowl of cooled lentils with sunflower influence instead. Historians still argue whether palace chefs consulted astrology or simply invented reasons to avoid bad menus. You've done both, sometimes at the same time. The trays vanish. You sit, and for exactly 47 seconds, no one speaks. Until the door creaks open. You hear a cough. Then, chef, there's a visitor. You frown, stand, and find a woman at the entrance to your kitchen. Not a noble, not a servant, a farmer. Mud still on her hem, holding a basket. You raise an eyebrow. "I brought these," she says, lifting the cloth to reveal plums. Dark, cool, fresh. The kind of plums that smell like hidden gardens and forgotten dreams. You blink. "They're from my orchard," she adds. "The ones you used at last year's solstice feast." You nod slowly. She smiles. They remembered. They asked where the plums were. So, here. You reach out, take one, bite in. It's perfect. A burst of tart and sweet, and something that reminds you why you started cooking before it became a job, soaked in fish requests and flaming herb racks. You nod. "Thank you." She bows and leaves. No payment. No request. Just a gift. You place the plums in the cool basin. Wrap them gently. You already know how you'll use them in a syrup for tomorrow's morning bread, when the dew still kisses the roof tiles and the nobles pretend they don't hear kitchen noises. The apprentice peers at the basket. Those look like actual magic. You say they are. Then, because peace is fleeting, you hear shouting. Loud, panicked, familiar. You rush outside, 2 of the palace geese are loose, again, waddling into the torchlit garden like they own it. The crown prince is on a bench, standing, screaming, holding a cushion like it's a shield. You lock eyes with the apprentice. He grabs a broom. You grab a roasted carrot. It's goose time. A short, chaotic chase ensues. Feathers fly. You scream in Farsi. The apprentice screams in kitchen speak. One of the geese hisses in what sounds like contempt. Eventually, you corner them near the date trees. The apprentice lunges, misses. You throw the carrot. It lands. Distraction works. The geese pause. You advance. And finally, they waddle back into their pen, hissing like scandalized diplomats. You slam the gate, panting, victorious. Do we always cook and fight poultry? The apprentice gasps. You grin. Only on even-numbered days. Back in the kitchen, you rinse your hands, peel another plum, take a bite, and for just a second, there is no storm, no scrolls, no flaming herbs or eel-based omens. Just the quiet sweetness of the job you love, and the fact that tomorrow you get to do it all again. You wake up face down on a sack of lentils, not the softest pillow, but definitely the most absorbent. The fires burned low. The apprentice snores nearby, wrapped in a tablecloth, one sandal, missing a sprig of thyme, clutched in his hand, like it owed him money. You rise, stretch, snap, crackle. Pop your back sounds like you're making popcorn. It's still dark. Not quite morning, but not quite anything else either. This is the liminal hour when kitchens hum with soft embers. Oil settles, and the only witnesses are smoke and memory. You step outside. The sky is ink, the moon a whisper, but over the courtyard wall comes the quiet voice of the palace gardener. You follow it. He's standing by the herb beds, gently humming to himself as he tends to the basil and wild coriander. He sees you, nods, says, "Thought you might want these," holds out a small bundle wrapped in damp cloth. Inside, wild rosebuds, dew-kissed and fragrant, like childhood secrets. You nod your thanks. Back in the kitchen, you set them beside the plums from the night before. You have an idea, but first bread. You grind what's left of the flour, just enough. You mix it with water salt, a pinch of crushed anise, and a little milk the apprentice miraculously remembered to set aside. You knead, you wait, you shape, and then you make the glaze. plum pulp reduced over coals until thick and sticky. You add a splash of rosewater, then the buds shredded, stirred, steeped. The kitchen smells like a memory that never really existed. The loaves go in. You baste them halfway through. When they come out, they shine with a gloss Todip, the apprentice gobs. Are they edible or enchanted? You shrug. Both. You set them on the table just as a servant arrives for the morning tray. You load it with those plum-glazed loaves, fresh dates, and a small pot of salted yogurt with mint. Simplicity, grace, and behind it, a note, not from the royals, from the head scribe. Your almond clouds are being discussed in poetry circles. Also, I may propose marriage to your pickled figs. Be warned. You laugh. It's a tired laugh, but genuine. You sip water, stare at the fire, and hear it, the voice of the king's personal physician. All ready. He enters like a man who's never been wrong in his life. He carries a scroll, always a scroll. He says, "We must prepare a cleansing dish." You stare. He continues, "Too much roasted meat at last night's feast. The nobles are heavy with imbalance. We must cook something that speaks of clarity." You nod slowly and go looking for barley. You find it, soak it, add a hint of lime, chopped herbs, a little cumin, and serve it with crisp cucumber slices and cold broth. It's light, clean, honest. The physician sniffs it, nods, leaves. You and the apprentice high-five without making eye contact. It's become a ritual. Then the door opens again. This time, it's the head dancer. You blink. She smiles. Evening performance. They'd like a thematic dessert, something that tastes like rhythm. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. The lead dancer said, "Music, but chewy." You sigh. Then pull out figs, sesame, and crushed nuts. You mix them into a paste roll, them into small drums, and top each with a candied almond that gives a satisfying little crack when bitten. Dancer bites. She takes one, bites. Eyes widen. You've captured tempo. You nod. Not surprised, only tired. The kitchen glows now, not with fire, but with meaning. The scrolls on the wall grow thicker. Little notes, scribbles, praise, poetry, warnings, even a crude drawing of a swan that may or may not be holding a spoon. You look around, then pause, because someone left something on your prep table. A small clay cup. Inside, Ice. Real ice. Cracked. Melting. But unmistakably cold. No note. No courier. Just the impossible in a cup. You touch it. Laugh. Whisper so. The ice keeper remembers. Quirky fact. It wasn't uncommon for palace departments to send surprise gifts across disciplines. Poets received cakes. Astronomers got wine and chefs. Sometimes got miracles. You sip the icy water, close your eyes, and feel your soul briefly cool. Because in the palace, every job is a fire, and every moment of quiet is a rare, stolen breath. You don't get many breaths. Not here, not in a palace where menus shift with moods, and your most reliable coworker is a sarcastic breeze that sometimes cools the lentil pot. The apprentice bursts in holding a scroll like it's on fire. He's grinning. Always a bad sign. They're planning a surprise banquet tonight, he says breathlessly, for the foreign ambassador from the West, the one who thinks pickled goat is dessert. You groan. He adds, and they want something blended. Something Persian, but with hints of the ambassador's homeland. You blink. You mean fusion. He nods so hard, his hair puffs flour. Historians still argue whether Persian royal chefs ever practiced culinary diplomacy through blended dishes. You've now entered that debate, armed only with pickled onions and a sense of mild dread. You begin with what you know, lamb slow-cooked, with dates, tamarind, and sumac. But then twist. You bake it into stuffed flatbread parcels, almost like little spiced pies, brushed with clarified butter and topped with shaved almond and honey. You call them midnight moons. Elegant, sweet, slightly confusing. Perfect. Then a side dish. You cube roasted carrots, toss them with mint sesame and a glaze of fig vinegar. Thank you. Haunted jar in the back of the pantry, and top it all with a single flake of salt gifted by the astrologer, which may or may not be sea salt or crushed quartz. You arrange the platter. Breathe. Then remember, no dinner is complete without soup. You quickly mix a cold yogurt soup with cucumber dill and a swirl of pomegranate syrup in the shape of a constellation. You call it Mercury descending. It tastes like tension and elegance. The dishes go out. You pray. You don't expect what happens next. Because a palace guard, red-cheeked and breathless, comes running back in. He says only 2 words. He clapped. You blink. The ambassador, you ask. The guard nods. He clapped. You sit down, stunned. This is unprecedented. No one claps in this palace unless there's music or someone drops a tray. The apprentice says, "We've peaked." You say, "No." Then stand. Now we must make dessert. Because dessert, after applause, has to be legendary. You pull out everything left. Rose jam, pistachio dust, chilled rice, preserved lemon peel, crystallized ginger, and your last egg. You make a custard, layered with sliced fig, chilled grape mash, and a swirl of saffron-scented milk, thickened with starch and charm. You pour it into carved stone cups and top it with a single plum slice from that precious farmer's basket. You don't name this one. You just send it. And when the tray returns empty again, you feel something shift. Not just in your back, which is definitely going to rebel tomorrow, but in the kitchen's air. This place, this half-broken, steam-slicked, flower-dusted sanctuary, is beginning to feel like a cathedral, a temple of resilience and cumin. The apprentice lights a small oil lamp. You both sit in silence. Then he says, "What if we trained a second goat?" But smarter. You stare. Like a kitchen goat, he continues. Could carry herbs, taste test things, wear a hat. You shake your head slowly. That way lies madness. He shrugs. But you think about it for longer than you'd like to admit. Outside, the rain has stopped. The stars blink awake. And from somewhere in the palace, soft music floats over the walls. You lean back, rest your head, and remember, you fed a kingdom today. You fed poets, astrologers, diplomats, even a goose or two, probably by accident, and all of them still standing, still smiling, still thankfully not blaming you for indigestion. That is victory. You close your eyes. The kitchen breathes. The coals glow. The apprentice yawns. And the last of the rose jam sticks to your thumb. You lick it, smile, and know deep in your heart you'll do it again tomorrow. Because cooking for royalty isn't a job. It's a quiet kind of magic. One stirred slowly, served warm, and plated with purpose. You wake up to a spoon on your face. Not metaphorically. An actual wooden spoon gently resting on your cheek, like a love tap from the universe. Or maybe a reminder that you fell asleep at the prep table again. You lift your head slowly, bits of plum glaze flaking off your elbow. The apprentice stands over you, holding a bowl. "It's tea," he says. You blink, sip. It's lukewarm, and tastes mostly of time and questionable decisions. You nod approvingly. Outside, The sun hasn't quite risen yet, but the air is already buzzing. You hear footsteps, hurried ones, and someone shouting about peacocks escaping again. You stretch, pull on your apron, and shuffle to the storeroom, where the morning light hits your spice jars like a blessing. You open the first scroll of the day. It reads, Brunch Request. The king wishes to entertain a visiting philosopher. Something to stir the intellect, please. No cucumbers. You sigh. Intellectual food. You wish they'd just ask for soup. But you're up for the challenge. You gather eggs, onions, fresh herbs, and your last bit of goat cheese, which you guard with the same intensity palace guards reserve for the treasury. You whip together a baked egg tart infused with fennel mint and black sesame served with toasted flatbread and a drizzle of pomegranate molasses for depth. Then, for flair, a small plate of date-stuffed figs sliced into spirals, arranged like philosophical diagrams that taste like sugar and wisdom. You call it the thinking platter. The apprentice stares. Do you think it'll make them smarter? You shrug. Only if they chew slowly. It's served with saffron tea and a side dish of carefully cubed melon, dusted in crushed rose petals. An hour later, a servant returns with a message. The philosopher cried. It reminded him of his mother's garden. You take a moment, just a moment. Then sit down. And do not cry. You nearly cry, but you're a professional, and you still have lunch to plan. Until a courier bursts in, carrying a chicken, a live chicken. He gasps, new palace regulation. All meats must be certified fresh, direct from source. You stare. At the bird, at the courier, at your career. Historians still argue whether palace kitchens had animal pens or outsourced their poultry. You now know the answer it was, whichever option involved the most chaos. The apprentice chases the chicken around the courtyard with a colander and a prayer. You get back to your lentils. Eventually you win. The chicken becomes stew with apricot and garlic and just a hint of disappointment. Lunch is served. You don't ask for feedback. You no longer need it. You just know. And then, like clockwork, a familiar figure appears in the doorway. The court musician. He grins. Chef, he says, we're planning a musical banquet, a performance where each course matches an instrument. You exhale. Meaning, he holds up a list. Starter, light and crisp, like the flute. Main bold and complex, like the oud. Dessert rich but playful, like tambourine. You say nothing. You just turn. Grab chickpeas and lemon. Roast eggplants with coriander. Fold honey into goat cream and garnish it with candied orange peel that crackles when bitten. By the end, your kitchen smells like a festival and possibly a minor rebellion. You arrange the courses, send them off, and when the final dish returns, it carries a note. The king tapped his fingers in rhythm while eating. You composed well. The apprentice reads it and whispers, "Are we chefs or sorcerers?" You smirk. Yes. Later, you find a small pouch on your prep table. It jingles. Inside saffron. Real, deep red, fragrant, precious. No note, no explanation. Just the universe saying, "Carry on." You seal it gently. Place it on the top shelf. And finally allow yourself to sit for more than 2 minutes. You close your eyes and whisper, "Tomorrow, we write poetry with soup." The kitchen sleeps, but you don't. Not really. Because even when the coals dim and the prep tables are wiped clean, your mind simmers low and steady, like the barley pot on festival days. You stir in your sleep. Not dreams, recipes. You wake to the apprentice shaking your shoulder eyes wide. "There's a delegation," he whispers, "from the north." You sit up, brain foggy, muscles stiff. "Already?" He nods. "They brought cheese?" You pause. "That's new?" In the kitchen courtyard, the delegation stands awkwardly beside a cart covered in cloth. You lift the sheet and are immediately hit by a smell best described as aggressively confident. The diplomat grins. It's aged goat wheel with juniper smoke. "Very prestigious where we're from." You nod, trying not to gag or cry. He adds, "We hoped the palace chef could create something memorable." Of course you can. You've created edible swans, diplomatic falcon tributes, and stew that allegedly made a philosopher weep. So yes, you can do this. You carry the cheese inside like it's a volatile relic. Historians still argue whether foreign ingredients were welcomed in Persian court cuisine or tolerated with polite confusion. You're now actively engaged in that argument with your nose. You slice it open. It's creamy, sharp, surprisingly lovely. You begin. You whip the cheese into a spread with mint-crushed walnuts and a dash of sumac. You bake thin barley crisps to serve it on. Then you drizzle date syrup over the top, because if you can't make something delicious, you can at least make it shiny. You send the platter out. Wait. The reply is swift. They smiled. They asked for seconds. One tried to barter for your recipe using an emerald ring. You blink. You did not see that coming. You reward yourself with 2 almonds and a long stare into the distance. Then a runner arrives. The palace librarian requests a meal. You frown. He's never requested anything before. The note reads, "Something silent for reading. Also, not messy." You laugh, because who else but a librarian would order a meal like it's a scroll? You set to work. You prepare a dish of herbed rice, dumplings, small, soft, infused with dill and lemon, served with yogurt in a sealed clay pot. You call it quiet wisdom. You send it up with a side of pickled turnip curls for texture without betrayal. When it returns, the plate is clean, and there's a folded parchment tucked beneath. Inside, a meal fit for parchment. Thank you. You add that note to your growing wall of scribbles and gratitude. And then it happens. The unexpected moment that chefs both dread and live for. The king enters. Not his steward, not a messenger. The actual king. He strolls in like a man inspecting a vineyard, hands clasped behind his back. Eyes taking in every pot, every tray, every smudge of flour on your apron. He stops in front of you. You bow. He says nothing for a long moment. Then I heard you made soup that sings. You blink. That wasn't literal, Your Majesty. He nods. Still, I'm intrigued. He turns, picks up a ladle, dips it into your most recent pot barley and quince stew with cinnamon and crushed almond. He sips. He stares at the wall. Then, and leaves. You turn to the apprentice who's frozen mid-onion chop. Was that good? He asks. You shrug. He didn't spit. You both nod solemnly. Then, as if summoned by the drama, the temple baker returns. He's holding honeyed bread stamped with a sigil you don't recognize. For the solstice, he says. Blessings from the east wall. You cut a slice. It's chewy, golden, laced with clove and something floral. You bow. He bows lower. You add it to the dessert board and whisper, "Let's make harmony." Together, you build the solstice platter. Honeyed temple bread, fig and ginger, jam, candied melon slices, rose water glazed almonds, and a small cup of cinnamon tea steeped over coal embers. It goes out with no announcement. Later, it returns with a token, a bronze spoon etched with the royal crest. The apprentice holds it like it's Excalibur. You lean back, close your eyes, and say, Let's pretend this day is over. But you both know it's not. Because in this kitchen, tomorrow always starts before today ends. You tell yourself you'll rest. You even sit down for exactly 11 seconds. Then someone yells, "Fire!" You leap up, heart pounding, only to find it's metaphorical, a euphemism from the steward, meaning the torches in the grand dining hall have gone out, and guests are panicking, like decorative pigeons at a falcon show. You grab the oil ladle, a bundle of mint stems, and the apprentice, because if something explodes, you'd like a witness. You light the torches again, one by one. The hall regains its glow. The guests calm. Crisis averted. You return to the kitchen. The apprentice whispers, "That counted as our break, didn't it?" You nod solemnly. Back inside, a new scroll awaits. The royal tutor has a request. A learning luncheon, light fare, for discussion. Must not stain scrolls. Of course, you roll up your sleeves. You craft lentil parcels wrapped in spinach leaves, tied with string, like tiny edible letters. You add cheese stuffed olives, gently toasted over embers. And for dessert, pomegranate pearls, dusted with powdered fig sugar, served in a bowl shaped like an ink pot. You call it the scholar's tasting tray. The platter goes out, returns with a wax-sealed scroll. Perfect balance between thought and time. You chuckle, but the silence doesn't last. The apprentice screams. You run. There, sitting on the spice rack, is a snake, coiled, smiling, suspiciously calm. You freeze. It blinks. The apprentice holds a spoon like it's a weapon of war. You call the palace animal handler. She arrives with a sack, a flute, and a bad attitude. I told them not to let the astrologer keep pets near the herb garden. The snake is scooped. The panic dissolves. You go back to work like it's normal. The next scroll is simpler. A birthday dinner for one of the king's younger nieces. She wants sweet rice, fruit that looks like animals. A surprise. You begin. You simmer. Saffron rice stirring in sugar, chopped dates, and milk until it shines like treasure. You mold apple slices into butterflies, figs into turtles, and pears into suspiciously plump owls. Then, for the surprise, you bake a tiny cake inside a hollowed-out pomegranate. It steams gently. You dust it with gold powder, liberated from the calligraphy room, and tuck a rose petal on top. The tray is carried out with pomp. Moments later, the girl herself runs in. She hugs your apron. and says, "That owl was so dumb-looking. I loved him." You're not sure whether to be flattered. The apprentice whispers, "High praise." Then you hear drums. Outside, loud, rhythmic. A procession. No, a spontaneous performance in the courtyard, led by dancers from the southern coast. And of course, dancers require snacks. You assemble a spice tray, toasted chickpeas, sugared almonds, spiced figs, fried mint leaves with honey. You call it footwork fuel. It vanishes fast. A dancer returns with a bracelet made of dates and string, places it on your wrist, and says, "To ward off hunger, spirits." You smile, until the apprentice says, "You just fed 20 people with 6 figs and 2 jokes." You reply, "That's the job." Later, just before you sit again, a guard from the outer city gate rushes in. He's carrying a single jar. It's warm, glazed, and humming slightly. You open it carefully. Inside, fermented garlic honey, a gift from a mountain trader. No note, just the taste of wood smoke and storms. You stir it into tea. Sip. It's strange, strong, and somehow comforting. You offer a sip to the apprentice. He coughs violently, then says, "Tastes like thunder, made friends with syrup." You nod. You store the jar high on a shelf marked "Only in emergencies" or for diplomats. As the night drips slowly into dawn, the kitchen still pulses. Your feet ache. Your eyes sting. But your hands still move. Because there's always one more scroll. One more flavor. One more person waiting to be nourished into memory. It's nearly dawn when the palace falls into a rare kind of hush. Not silence, exactly, but the soft, rhythmic lull of servants sweeping guards yawning, and the distant murmur of someone somewhere still chewing. You lean on the prep table, staring at a bowl of half-chopped pistachios, unsure whether to finish or let them go live free in the wild. The apprentice arrives with news. He says it the way someone announces a solar eclipse. The queen is fasting. You blink, he continues, but she still wants to host a meal. You nod slowly. A non-eating meal for guests. To observe, to admire, to smell, but not to consume. Of course, you've entered the realm of culinary theater. You pull out the finest plates etched with gold vines and tiny phoenixes. You begin plating air. No, not literally, but close. You craft scent bowls with cinnamon sticks and rose water steam. You prepare a tray of herb displays. Lavender, bay mint each with a small label, like a royal perfume sampler. Then a salad made only for appearance. Thin-cut vegetables, curled like flowers, arranged on chilled glass. No dressing, no salt, just presence. Historians still argue whether royal fasts were spiritual political or simply dietary resets after too many fig tarts. You argue they were excuses to throw elaborate non-meals that made chefs question reality. The queen arrives briefly. She does not eat, but she smiles. That's enough. After the meal, you return to the kitchen, now fully in liminal time, that sacred hour when the pots cool and the floor is finally just a floor, not an obstacle course of spills and squawks. You pour yourself water, add a splash of rose syrup, and sit, truly sit, for 4 glorious minutes. Until a knock. You don't even groan. You just stand. It's the scribe in training, a nervous young man with ink on his cheek and a scroll in both hands. I've been asked to chronicle your recipes. You blink. For what? He shrugs. The king says your dishes are being talked about in other cities. He wants a record. You stare, then laugh quietly, the kind that comes from disbelief and sleep deprivation. You offer him a stool and begin reciting, one by one. The herbed dumplings of silence, the stew that may have healed a diplomat, the carrot tribute to goose avoidance, the fusion pie that bridged empires. You skip the mistakes mostly, but you mention the accidents that became miracles, and the moments of flavor that came from desperation and half-melted jars. The scribe writes furiously, stops only to ask, "Did you mean to pickle those onions in plum vinegar?" You smile. No, but it worked. He nods, awe blooming in his ink-stained eyes. By the time he finishes, the sun is slicing through the sky like a honey-dipped blade. You walk him out. The palace is glowing in its golden hush. The breeze carries the scent of breakfast being prepared somewhere else for once, not by you. You return inside. The apprentice is asleep, face down on a crate of lentils. You drape a cloth over him. Begin prepping one last dish. Not for the royals, not for guests, but for you. You take yesterday's leftover barley, fold in nuts, stir in garlic honey and fresh mint. You slow cook it until it hums. Then you eat, alone, quiet. Not for survival, not for applause, but for joy. And in that moment, in that kitchen, with your sleeves rolled up and your bowl warm in your hands, you feel rich, not in coin, but in meaning. Because cooking here, for these impossible people, with these unpredictable scrolls and impossible requests. It has somehow become your rhythm, your music, your devotion, your strange, flower-dusted peace. You've fed nobles, monks, geese, musicians, falconers, and once by sheer accident, a passing cat who now thinks it owns the herb shelf. You've stirred grief into soup laughter, into spice diplomacy, into dessert. And now at last the scrolls have stopped. The hallways are quiet. Even the goat is sleeping. You light a single lamp, not for cooking, just for company. The kitchen glows with the kind of warmth that doesn't come from flame-earned warmth, the kind that clings to stone and memory. You sit, and in the hush of early morning, you do something almost sacred. You breathe. You're still in your apron. There's flour in your hair. A fig seed clings to your sleeve like it's auditioning for permanence, but none of it matters. You pick up a piece of old bread, still soft in the center, and dip it into a bowl of oil and za'atar. You chew slowly and think about the first time you stepped into this kitchen, back when the knives were too heavy and the fire too loud. Now the knives listen. The fire dances to your rhythm, and even the apprentice, still snoring beneath the prep table, knows how to trim dill without accidentally cursing the soup. You glance up at your growing wall of scribbles and notes tokens of gratitude, doodles from dancers, badly spelled, love letters from a guard who swore your lentils saved his relationship. You smile, then add your own. Just a line, scratched in ink beside the spot where the herb rack once burst into flames. We fed the whole world, quietly. You put down the pen, extinguish the lamp, let the kitchen go dark just for a moment, and sit in that darkness, not as a servant, not even as a chef, but as someone who gave light through heat and healing through flavor and truth through texture. Because behind every noble's plate, behind every spoonful of saffron rice, behind every feast where no one looked up from the food, there was you. And now you rest. You lean back, close your eyes, and just as your thoughts begin to drift, the apprentice murmurs in his sleep, "Do you think the goat would wear a hat?" You laugh softly, like a spice settling into broth, then drift off, wrapped in the silence you earned. So now, dear listener, let yourself settle. Let the coals fade from orange to ash. Let your breath slow, like a spoon gliding through honey. You've walked through the smoke and the spice, You've stirred the pots of memory and mayhem. You've survived a palace kitchen where scrolls never stop and requests make less sense the later the hour. You've cooked for kings and dreamers, for dancers and falcons. You've made laughter edible and silence delicious. And now, you're done. You may still smell like ginger and garlic and a decision you made too quickly with pickled onions, but you're done. There's no next dish, no urgent tray, no flaming dill to save. Just the slow, safe dark of a kitchen resting. Just the warmth of a room that gave everything. And the echo of footsteps you made count. So sink into the stillness. Let the clay walls hold your story. Let the stone floor remember your pace, and let your heartbeat echo the rhythm of every meal you gave with care. You're not just a cook. You're a keeper of calm, a quiet artist with burned fingertips and a soul that smells faintly of saffron. Sleep now. You've earned it, more than anyone.